There are 651 Gamecube games, and I'm trying to beat them all while at the mercy of this horrendous wheel. Welcome to Beating the Gamecube. Game number 17 is Luigi's Mansion. Released in 2001, it was both developed and published by Nintendo. This is a quintessential Gamecube game, the first Mario title released on the system, and a beloved classic for myself and millions of others. It had been 20 years since I last played it, so I was super excited for a revisit. How did it go? Let's find out. We begin with Luigi falling for one of the classic blunders, as he heads to claim a prize from a contest that he won without entering. His prize? The titular mansion. Gameplay began immediately, and all I could do was interact with various doors. However, all of them were locked, and one also had a barrier of thorns surrounding it. After checking every door, a cutscene played showing a spooky ghost dropping a key and fleeing. After I used the key to give chase, the ghost attacked and cornered me. Luckily, I was rescued by Professor Egad. Sadly though, he is not very good at ghost busting, and thus invited me to his nearby hut to discuss how to handle these spiteful spooks. Once we were safe, he told me that the mansion appeared out of nowhere just a few days ago, and we've been fooled by the spirits. Mario arrived earlier than us, but without the professor's tech to defend himself, he's been taken captive, meaning we will need to find and rescue our bro. Next was a nice quick tutorial to learn how to control the professor's vacuum-based anti-ghost weapon, the Poltergust 3000. Surprising a ghost with a flashlight causes its heart to appear and become vulnerable. You then need to begin vacuuming quickly before they vanish. Once you start giving them the big suck, you try to keep the intake trained on them with the C-stick, and pulling the analog stick away from your target increases the speed at which you can deplete their health. Take them all the way to 0 and you successfully trap them for good. While the C-stick on the GameCube controller is made for ants, I found using it to aim the flashlight at Poltergust held up surprisingly well. The controls in general are solid across the board, and the tutorial is a short and snappy 3 minutes, letting you get right into the action. Armed with my Hurricane Hoover, I ventured back into the mansion, ready to fight. Right away, I found a poor crying Toad, and I talked to the little guy. Toads will save your game, and occasionally offer hints on where to go next. Then it was back into the room from earlier to get some payback. I extinguished some candles, and that caused a cutscene where various portraits in the room threatened that they would do the same thing to Luigi that they already did to Mario. Those orange ghosts from earlier attack, but these are the simplest enemies in the game, and they go down without any fuss at all. Defeating every ghost in a room will usually spawn a chest containing some loot. This particular chest gave me a key. We have a handy little tool called the Game Boy Horror. This serves as our map, and it also shows which door corresponds to each key. Neat. Each room is also initially dark, and the lights will only come on after every ghost inside is beaten. This is a nifty way to help the player keep track of where they have been, and this was a godsend for little kid me back in the day. Here I saw some purple ghosts. They have double the health of oranges, but they're still not that hard to deal with. The next room had a blue ghost in it. These run away from you, and they will drop treasure if busted, but if they successfully flee, they will be gone for the entire playthrough. Harsh. There were also some of these annoying green boys. These rascally race throw banana peels, and if you slip on them, you take damage and it interrupts your vacuuming. Once the lights were on, I spotted the key up on a shelf and I used the vacuum to get it down. I needed to return to the foyer, and I remembered a cool trick from when I last played 20 years ago. The Game Boy Horror has a first-person camera feature that lets you inspect any object you press A on. Using it on any mirror will instantly warp you back to the foyer, which can save tens of minutes throughout the playthrough. This key opened the top left door, but before I could head through, the professor called to warn me that there are much more powerful ghosts inside. They have escaped from portraits in his gallery. I'll be referring to them as portrait ghosts from here. Portrait ghosts could be considered mini-bosses, and unlike your average apparition, require doing something special to make them vulnerable. It took me a minute to remember how the first one worked. It was a classic Boo scenario. You just need to not look at him long enough for him to appear, eventually he will yawn, let his guard down, and that's when I pounced. These guys have way more health, and they also shoot out poison mushrooms to stop you, but good handling of the C and analog sticks can lead to you grabbing most in one cycle. With that, we had Neville the bookish father captured, and grabbed the next key for a nearby room. Chapter 1 serves as a tutorial of sorts, meaning things happen thick and fast, and I appreciate that. This time we have Lydia, the mirror-gazing mother. Pulling the curtains open caused a draft, and when she went to close them, that's when I could use the flashlight. Her movement is a little bit more aggressive, so it did take me 2 cycles, but that wasn't too bad. With these two down, it's time for our first boss fight, and this one, as a kid, creeped me out big time. Dude, this boss when I was a kid, this was definitely a bit spooky. This boss is Chauncey, the spoiled baby. I need to wake him up, and I did so by blowing the rocking horse using the Poltergust. Once he started attacking me, I sucked up the nearby ball and fired it at him. He didn't like that, and said that it wasn't fair that I'm big and he's small. He then used some spirit magic to shrink Luigi down, leading to the real fight inside his crib. The creativity in this game is one of the things that makes it so memorable and a cut above so many other Gamecube titles. It's a short one for sure, but it's packed full of objectives, and the mansion has fantastic and intentional design throughout. Chauncey's main attacks are throwing bouncy balls at you and firing flying rocking horses when they line up with you. Eventually, one ball remains and you can fire it at him to make him vulnerable. I'm pretty sure speedrunners can one-cycle this boss, but I couldn't even get close. It took me a few rounds to deplete his health, and I had a few mishaps with the balls throughout the fight. On my third and final cycle, I depleted his health, and with that, we'd slurped up our first of 4 bosses. This time, I get a special chest containing a giant key of hearts, and then the professor summoned me back to his hut. We then get one of my favorite scenes in the game. We shoot the captured portrait ghosts into the professor's newest invention, the ghost portraitizer, patent pending, and watch them become visible and tangible before finally being pressed back into the portraits, trapping them for good. Then a chapter conclusion summarizes the portrait ghosts we've captured and how much treasure we've hoarded. I've mentioned treasure several times already, and I'll be explaining that a little bit more later. Upon returning to the mansion, I used the heart key on the main entryway. That removed the thorns and allowed me a much broader area for Chapter 2. By now, hopefully I've used Chapter 1 to cover the mechanics, basic gameplay loop, and part of what makes this game so appealing. The bulk of the game is exploring each new area of the mansion you unlock, tracking down and capturing each portrait ghost, and trying to find and rescue Mario. There is, of course, one major gameplay loop I need to mention, but to unlock it, I needed to tackle my next portrait ghosts. Inside the ballroom is a bunch of dancing Shy Guy ghosts. Geists? No, that's already a word. By pulling their masks off, I could then flashlight and vacuum them up. Whilst writing this script, by the way, I'm constantly tempted to say flash and suck as a shorthand, but that probably sounds a bit too sussy. Then it was time to capture the floating Walinders. I just waited until they finished their dance number, took a bow, and then it was a quick and easy one cycle to grab them. Nearby is a little storage closet, and inside I sucked up all manner of revolting revenants to turn the lights on. The mirror on the wall here reveals a hidden switch off camera, and pressing it opens a false wall into the rest of the room. Behind a poster very clearly labeled danger, I activated another switch, and this released an army of Boos and their leader, King Boo. He says he'll do to me what he did to Mario, but upon seeing my Poltergust, they all scatter and flee. The professor explains that to rescue Mario, we need to defeat King Boo, but the Boos act as a hive, and the king is too powerful for me to handle. I need to capture every pleb Boo hidden in the mansion to weaken the king. There are 50 whole Boos to find, and they only appear in lit rooms once the other objectives are complete. They hide within a random object or item of furniture, and you need to press A on them to try and force them out. The Game Boy Horror has a built-in radar. It flashes yellow and red to indicate proximity, though there can also sometimes be decoys and even bombs to bait you. Catching Boos can be really annoying. You don't hook onto them like you do with other ghosts, but instead must aim the suction at them to slowly deplete their health. If you fail to catch them in one go, they flee into an adjacent room and stay at the current health. Later Boos can have up to 300 HP, so you can imagine how annoying they can be to catch. For brevity's sake, I won't be covering most Boos throughout the run. You could generally assume I grab them after each portrait ghost. They each have a unique Boo-based pun, so the first time you play through, it's a nice little extra thing. During my travels, I also found the Fire Element Medal. This is an upgrade that allows for the use of fire with the Poltergust. Any source of fire has cute little fire elementals that spawn from it, and sucking one of these up will provide a full tank of fire energy. This can be fired by using the left trigger. You can use this to deal with certain ghosts, but it's most useful for lighting candles to unlock hidden objects and open certain doors. I also found Mario's hat. It was inside a washing machine. Some of his possessions are scattered throughout the mansion. You can take them to Madame Clairvoyeur, the only friendly ghost. She will use them to perform a reading to give you vague clues on what happened to our brother. I got lost for a while trying to remember what to do next. After 2 decades, my memories were a bit spotty. I needed to find more portrait ghosts to proceed. Eventually, I remembered that with the fire medal, I could light some floating candles that roam the halls, and that reveals Shivers the butler. He flees for several minutes, and eventually will retreat into his chambers, becoming vulnerable. Capturing him provided my next key. Our next portrait ghost moves me on to one of the strongest aspects of the game, sound design. This is simply a masterclass with both the music and sound effects being top-notch. There is of course the classic theme song, and Luigi even nervously hums and whistles along as you explore. You can press A to shout for Mario, and that will become increasingly erratic the more scared Luigi becomes. Even something as simple as the sound effect when you teleport back to the foyer is just fantastic. I'm going to include a few examples of amazing sound effects, but this is only a sample. They'd have to like... Oh yeah. Ooh, I love that sound. The reason I was thinking about sound design is this next portrait ghost is a musician. You summon her by interacting with every instrument in her room to make them play the classic Mario theme song. Once they're all going, she appears at the piano to join in. This is one of the most memorable bits of the game from when I was a kid for sure. Sadly, like nearly all other ghosts, she doesn't want to be my friend and attacks me with flying sheet music. Sucking those up made her vulnerable, and with that, we're nearly at boss number 2. Not every portrait ghost is mandatory. Mr. Lugs, for instance, can be totally skipped if you wish. He's an annoying one too. He constantly eats, and the waiters are continually topping up his meal. I had to catch each waiter as they appeared until his food ran out. Once he was throwing a hissy fit and tired himself out, it was a case of capturing him like any other ghost. In the nearby kitchen, I found the water medal, and as you can probably guess, this lets me suck up water spirits and shoot water from the tank. Some ghosts have an element and are immune to the flashlight. Instead, you counter their element to make them vulnerable. Fire beats water, water beats fire. Water can also be used to put out fire-based obstacles and water a little plant in the garden. Remembering to water this plant every chapter eventually rewards a massive heap of treasure, and speaking of treasure, let me explain that properly. Throughout your journey, you can acquire all manner of booty. Beating portrait ghosts awards pearls, with bigger and higher quantities being awarded for fast victories. Most rooms contain notes and coins that can be found in objects by tapping them or using the Poltergust. Then there are also gems of various types that can be acquired through chests and capturing those blue money ghosts I mentioned near the start. There are even super rare gold mice that make a little ding when they appear, and if you catch one, it rewards a decent chunk of change. Money is entirely optional and unneeded for this playthrough, but the more you collect, the higher the grade you receive at the end of the game. So I decided to grab what money I reasonably could and shoot for the best rank possible. I felt a bit bad about this next portrait ghost. He's just a pupper. A ghost type called Mr. Bones is sent to play fetch to keep Spooky the guard dog from barking, and I started by capturing Mr. Bones. Then each time the dog starts licking the leftover bone, his heart becomes vulnerable, and I could capture him too. Doing so made his vacated doghouse glow, and using the Game Boy horror on that warped me into a graveyard. In here was an army of Mr. Bones. It was really tricky with multiple attacking me at the same time, but dodging the bones and waiting for the right moment let me catch each in turn. With the graveyard empty, the big tombstone began to glow, and walking up to it triggered a cutscene revealing boss number 2, Bogmire the Cemetery Shadow. This is a really cool and cinematic fight. Bogmire's real body can be seen briefly appearing, but it's completely intangible. Constant lightning strikes will summon an army of shadows of various sizes. Sucking up a shadow creates a launchable ball, and by shooting it at Bogmire, you can make him tangible, allowing an attack on his heart. Like with Chauncey, I found it really tricky to keep the suction trained on him, and this meant it took several cycles to whittle him down. This is a really good time to mention just how well the game has held up for me visually. For a launch title on the Gamecube, I think it still looks fantastic. Stylized graphics are fairly timeless, and between this and the Wind Waker, I think the Gamecube could still look solid even now. Several minutes later, I splattered him with a final shadow and captured my second boss. Let's go! Another golden chest yielded the key of clubs, and then it was back to EGADs for the chapter wrap-up. We get the awesome cutscene of the ghosts being portraitified, and then the summary of portrait ghosts and money from before. So far I had every ghost including optionals and most of the cash available. We had a little mooch around the gallery. This is just for when you want to have a review of the portrait ghost you've previously yoinked. Then of course it was back to the mansion for chapter 3. The club key opened up my next explorable area. This includes outdoors and the second story. Venturing down into the outdoor well led me to a dead end, and it's our first sighting of our beloved brother. We see that King Boo has sealed Mario inside a portrait, but we're unable to reach him, so we're going to need to find a way to free him. Of course, I couldn't neglect my finances, so I went back to water the flower for a second time. Next chapter, I would get my payout. From here, I'm going to proceed a bit more briskly. I think I've covered everything I wanted to mechanics-wise, and this way there will still be things to discover if this inspires any first-time gamers to give this a whirl. After Conan last week, we had another buff dude here, with Beef Atlas Giga Chad Ghost. I nabbed him by biffing him with his own punching bag, to make him vulnerable. He was by far one of the most annoying ghosts to catch. There's a lot of equipment in the room, and if you get pulled into it, you take damage and it interrupts the suck. This then granted access to an entirely new floor, and of course a bunch more portrait ghosts and boos to track down. I used a weird pad on the ground to flip onto the ceiling, and was able to reach the final elemental medal, with this one being ice. My new Frosty Freeze Ray let me head to the hot tub section on Twitch to capture Miss Petunia. Freezing her bath will cause her to sneeze, and then it's a pretty straightforward case of battling her until you land the catch. As mentioned earlier, the Game Boy Horror has a comprehensive map built into it, and it tells you exactly which doors you have a key for. This makes progressing usually straightforward, with the occasional curveball. A new area's hallway remains unlit until the boss is defeated, so you can assume that between each portrait ghost I am battling my way through hordes of enemies. I backtracked for another optional ghost. This time it's Slim Bankshot Pool Shark Extraordinaire. This is another pesky one. He fires pool balls that bounce around the room. I had to suck one up and fire at him, then once he was vulnerable, catch him whilst avoiding the remaining balls. Money! These optional portrait ghosts usually yield a big payday, and it all counts towards that final rank. My lust for loot led me to Nana's room. As everyone knows, old people are hoarding wealth. I yoinked her retirement savings, and then it was time to take her on too. She got her revenge though. She is easily one of the most annoying ghosts in the game. To make her vulnerable, I needed to suck up each ball of yarn and fire them at her. As soon as you grab one though, her rocking chair starts zooming around like she's playing Mario Kart, and if she crashes into you, hits you by throwing a knitting needle, or if you miss a single yarn ball, she will instantly vanish, meaning you need to leave the room to reset her and do the whole thing again. I locked her down eventually, but man did she make me work for it. Once you make her vulnerable, she doesn't put up much of a fight, but RIP Nana, you were a worthy adversary. The key I gained led me all the way back to the first area where Chauncey was, so I needed to backtrack a fair bit. We're not far off the chapter 3 boss already. If you know where you're going, this is definitely one of the speedier ones. This room belongs to the twin portrait ghosts, and I summoned them by spinning their mobile with the Poltergust. Before they'll fight me though, they challenge me to hide and seek. I found them on my second attempt after realizing the boxes they're in shake very slightly if you wait. They accused me of cheating, and then it was fight time. This is another annoying fight, as it's 2 versus 1. One of them flies around in a plane, dropping bombs, and the other drives his car into you. I'm realizing writing this chapter had a lot of tricky portrait ghosts in it. By focusing one of them for long enough, you can suck up their vehicle and that makes them vulnerable. I focused down the car first, as he's a little bit more direct with his attacks, and then with him out of the way, it was easy enough to take down the flying one. A big reward this time, Mario's stinky old shoe. Huge! I was only missing one Mario item now, and the next room I had access to was the observatory, so I made my way there. I enjoyed this area a ton. First I used the fire medal to light a bunch of candles. This caused the doors to lock and summoned a horde of those spectral shy guys. Then when I entered the next room, you could see a moon glowing. By grabbing a shooting star with your Hoover and firing it at the moon, you cause it to straight up explode. Then that summons a magical path leading you to the final Mario item. Mario's star, bit of an odd one next to his shoe and a hat, but it is what it is. With every Mario item found, it was back to Madame Clairvoyeur. Each item gives some associated dialogue, but it's all just flavor. When she has seen all of them, she says that she can finally rest happily and will return to her portrait willingly. This is the only ghost in the game that puts up absolutely no fight and straight up helps you. Thank you, Clairvoyeur. You were a real one. The key from her provides access to the 3rd floor, and that's where the second to last boss awaits. Getting there took about 10 minutes as it's a decently long trek. There's a few puzzles along the way and a few billion banshees to fight. The 3rd floor provides access to a huge balcony, and as soon as I set foot on it, the Game Boy Horror Boo radar started going totally nuts. This balcony is insanely big, but after having a poke around, I found a ring of boos doing a happy little dance. By talking to them, I triggered a cutscene where after giving Luigi the fright of his life, they merge into boss number 3, Boolossus. This fight is cool, but it's a bit tedious too. The giant boo bounces after you, and it's completely invulnerable. You have to make it bounce into the ice sculpture's horns, causing it to pop back into tiny boos. Then, by grabbing the freeze element off the sculptures, you freeze the boos, and that lets you suck them up. The trouble is, freezing the boos is anything but consistent, and the window to grab them is super short. Boolossus also shrinks with every missing boo, and the smaller he becomes, the harder it is to line him up with the horn. It's really funny looking back how long it took me to catch the final one. It just kept giving me the slip, but I finally froze him, and with that, I'd beaten boss 3. This time it was the diamond key, which provides access to more of floor 3 and the rest of the mansion. By now you know the deal, back to the professors, zappy wappy portrait go, chapter summary, treasure stats. And here we go, on to the final chapter to beat this game. My first port of call was my precious flower, which was finally ready to cash out. One last water caused it to shoot out oodles of cash, including a yellow diamond, the rarest and most valuable item in the game. Sweet deal. When I used the key to open the Thorns door, a cutscene played showing a giant lightning strike hitting the mansion and causing a total blackout. I remember tiny kid me totally freaking out when this happened. Now every single room in the mansion has an endless supply of ghosts in it, making getting around much more annoying. I also got very lost for 15 minutes. Shoutouts to my chat for not backseating, by the way, the goats. I knew where the breaker room was from earlier, but it's now locked, and I for the life of me just couldn't remember how to get the key. I wandered all over the mansion, fighting hordes of horrors before eventually stumbling across Uncle Grimly in the wardrobe room. Apparently he enjoys total darkness, and he's the one who locked the breaker room, and that's why we haven't seen him until now. He put up no resistance though, and with that key, I was able to enter the breaker room and restore the power. This means, once again, there is only darkness in the rooms I haven't previously cleared. With Boolossus counting as a bunch of boos, I was only 12 short, but they are so tanky at this point. 200 health is nuts, and I rarely found myself catching them without needing to chase them from room to room. Through a dusty room with more of those flippy ceiling pads, I made my way to the final area. Now I needed to grab the remaining portrait ghosts in here and on floor 3 before it was final boss time. Here we also see what happens if you try to head to the final boss without capturing every single boo. The final Thorn door stands in the way, and King Boo shows us his power when he still has subjects. God, the sound design in this game is so good. I'm just going to fire off through the remaining portrait ghosts now, as nearly all of them are optional in this chapter, and at this point, the focus is on locking the final door and reaching the boss. First up was the Clockwork Soldiers. This is our one and only 3 against 1 fight, but I found them less annoying than the twins. You wake them up by activating every clock in the room. Once they begin to move and attack, it's a case of vacuuming their backs to get their keys to fall out, then they become vulnerable, and they're not that hard to capture. Next up was Jarvis. He wants to play a whack-a-mole style game with his jars. He'll randomly pop his head out briefly. I needed to freeze him quickly, and after 5 successive hits, he grew mad and became vulnerable. Then it was a simple mop-up job, and that was sorted. Then we had Sir Weston the Climber. I found him completely frozen in the cold storage room, and needed to thaw him out by lighting fires whilst avoiding a rain of icicles. Once he was thawed, he became vulnerable, and it was a case of sucking him up whilst continuing to avoid the obstacles. Vincent Van Gogh is an interesting one. He serves as the gatekeeper to King Boo as he needs to be beaten to find the club key. This is a fun section. He has a gallery of his paintings of almost every basic kind of ghost that I've battled throughout my journey. He uses each one to summon 3 copies of said ghost, and you battle through them in a long gauntlet-style fight. Some of these can be really tricky, like the banana hurlers. 3 against 1 is a real pain in the ass. Once every ghost is gone, he complains that you ruined his work and attacks. Fortunately, he goes down with no fuss at all, which is nice after 5 minutes of fighting 20 plus spoops. This yields the club key, and is the only time a non-chapter ending boss gives one of these. The final optional portrait ghost was Sue P, the dozing girl. She is asleep upside down on the ceiling, and we've all been there, am I right? I sprayed her with water a few times to wake her up, and then it was on to the capture. She has some dolls as bodyguards that make her a little trickier than some, but within little time, we had every portrait ghost in the game, besides the head honcho. I also found a few special treasure rooms on my travels, but I'm not going to explain how to get to them. These are entirely for rank, and it's cool for people to be able to discover them for themselves if you check out the game, which you totally should. Now the only thing left to do was grab the final 2 boos to finish weakening the king. I haven't really shown boos much, and if you've played the game before, you probably know why. Finding all 50 could be a bit of a chore, and I had a few that really made me work for it. A couple of the 300 health ones took me several minutes to lock down. This is probably the weakest part of the game. It's not that I dislike it or anything, but the other parts are just so fun, the boos feel a little tedious by comparison. I was at 49 out of 50, and for the life of me, I could not find the final one. I had mostly caught each as I went, so I was a little bit baffled about where it could be. I think this is the one that escaped me into a room I hadn't unlocked yet, and by the time I had the key, I forgot. Eventually, I tracked him down in the basement, and landing your very last boo yields another of those super rare, giant yellow diamonds. Money, 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 money. And with that, I'd done everything the game has to offer, except defeat King Boo, so it's time to face that felonious phantom at last. I unlocked the final door with the club key, but I noticed my HP was only around half, so to play it safe, I went on a very quick heart-gathering mission. Once that was done, we headed back, and it's final boss time. Through the last door, we find King Boo admiring his Mario portrait and bragging about how helpless Mario is. He also says that Luigi and Mario must be eating gullible soup to fall for the mansion ruse. I kinda have to give him that one. This game's so good. Oh, it's so good. I still remember the feeling 2 decades back of seeing this fight for the first time. Goosebumps, man. Bowser coming out of left field is still really cool. The fight is really fun too. Bowser stomps around at high speeds, breathes fire, and tries to suck you up with a whirlwind, giving me a taste of my own medicine after all this ghost sucking I've done. Eventually he throws spike bombs at you, and by suctioning one of those and firing at him, it blows his head off and reveals King Boo inside. I don't know if even speedrunners can one-cycle this fight, but I could only manage about 150 damage at a time. My second hit came almost instantly. I baited him into charging into a corner and landed an easy bomb, racking up a little bit more damage. When you get him down below 100 HP, the head doesn't attach properly and he runs around like an absolute loon. I love this game, man. This is the anti-Conan energy that I needed. I continued to play it safe, and with one final bit of sucky defeated the final boss. GG. We take his crown as our final treasure, and then we get a call from the professor congratulating me on a job well done. He tells me to bring Mario's portrait back to the lab, so we did just that. For one last time, we turned the spoops into portraits, and I love how you can just straight up dump Bowser's head into the machine. With every single ghost now restored to the gallery, we get our last ever chapter summary, and my final cash total was 90 million. And with that, the credits began to roll. You receive your grade after the credits, so I'm going to jump ahead to that quickly. EGAT used all of the treasure I found to build me a real house, and depending on your rank, you can get anything from a literal tent to a stately home. I locked in a respectable B, and that gave a fair-sized property. That'll do. And that covers Luigi's Mansion, a beloved classic for a reason. What it lacks in playtime, it more than makes up for in charm and densely packed objectives. It took me 4 hours and 43 minutes to beat this, and of course gets a very strong recommendation. I gave this a 3 for difficulty. There are a few trickier portrait ghosts to nab, and some of the boos are annoying, but difficulty isn't really the focus. Enjoyment I gave an 8. I love this game and had a blast playing it, but Killer 7 still remains my only 9, as it's just so unique and wonderful, it's going to be a hard experience to match. If you made it to the end, then please enjoy a sneak peek at what I'll be playing next time. Oh no. What is this? Jeremy McGrath's Supercross World. God. So there it is. Game 18 will be Jeremy McGrath Supercross World. Another early release title for the Gamecube. Can it hold a candle to this one? I guess we'll find out. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye bye.